Hi everybody, today I'm going to do a theory about Twin Peaks. I'm basically doing an Annie theory that I talked about during my rewatches, and I'd like to apologise in advance if I'm just rehashing something that went around in like 1993 or 94. I personally have never theorised anything about Twin Peaks. I always just let it wash over me. The only thing I theorised about was who killed Laura. So I'm one of these people that watched Twin Peaks first time around, and when it ended, that was it for me. I didn't spend any time thinking about Twin Peaks after that in terms of analysing it. So I followed a lot of shows over the years, and I tend to like the shows where people tend to theorise about them, in which everybody has their own reading. And whilst I don't necessarily agree with all theories, I think it's amazing that people come up with them and can back them up. Before I start my Annie theory, I did, think about like why I formulated this theory. And one question I had to ask myself was, do you like Annie as a character? And the answer I came up with was, Annie is not one of my favourites, let's put it that way. She comes in so late to the show, and she has basically one purpose. I always had a problem with the fact that she comes from a convent and has been there for so many years, and she's heralded as the perfect mate for Dale Cooper. Even though in later episodes we see Annie try and present herself from a position of strength, I just feel there was something that always irked me about her, that the fact that she was so inexperienced. So basically my Annie theory is that maybe Annie is not actually the Annie that we think she is. And by that I mean maybe she is inhabited by one of the spirits from the Black Lodge. Not Bob, because we see Bob outside of Annie during the time that she's on the show. Possibly the spirits that we see above the convenience store in Fire Walk With Me, in that strange meeting that they have in Philip Jeffries' dream vision. I also want to discuss the theory in light of some information that we have or have not got from Mark Frost's book, The Secret History of Twin Peaks. So this is going to be a spoilery theory. So if you don't want to know anything, please turn me off. So the reason that I think that this could be a possibility is A, because when Annie comes to town, Norma has never mentioned having a sister, as far as I know, as far as I can remember. She never mentions having a sister. Neither does her mother mention her sister when she comes to town, or Ernie, the stepfather. Please tell me if I'm wrong in any of these points, because I have a terrible memory and I don't know the show inside and out in terms of factual details and scripts and stuff. I just can't remember, especially when it comes to the second season, because I don't watch that as often, I think. So if I'm wrong about anything, you can just shout at me in the comment section below. Basically, when Annie comes back to town, they have lived in the town of Twin Peaks, right? The family. And I don't think we see any scenes of her being embraced by anyone that she knew before. So we don't see any of her previous friends. We see her see Sheriff Truman, who I assume has been sheriff for quite a while, and he doesn't seem to know her or recognize her. Likewise, when Dale discusses Annie to Sheriff Truman, he usually refers to her as Annie Blackburn, her full name, as if the sheriff does not know who she is, despite the fact that the sheriff has had a friendship with Norma for quite some time. So I thought that was a bit suspicious. I mean, they don't have to show everything on camera, but the fact that, someone like Harry doesn't seem to welcome her, as if like you've been away for a long time, was a bit weird. And that could indicate that, nobody actually knows much about her. So the fact that nobody seems to know her is a bit of a suspicious thing, and I mention this because of the fact that Since the Mark Frost's new book came out, she seems to have been erased from any kind of history that's been mentioned in the book. I'm not fully convinced that's the case yet. However, I wanted to tie this theory in with a segment from the book which mentions the fact that Lewis and Clark, when they were exploring, and Lewis seems to come across one of the lodges. I don't know from the description whether it's the White Lodge or the Black Lodge that he encounters, but he seems to have experienced this. And later on, he talks about having memory problems and thinking about his experiences with the lodges, or the lodge, as being something that he has almost forgotten, as if it was almost a dream to him. So that did get me thinking about how the lodges affect people and people's memories, and if there is a power that comes out of the lodge that makes people forget things, or makes people feel like they're, you know, in a dream or something like that, then is there any possibility that Annie did not really exist as Annie, and it was sort of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of fake sister thing, where she just appears and she has been planted by the lodge spirits in order to entice Dale to the lodge, basically. Annie and Dale fall in love very quickly, and I do wonder if this could be an effect from the lodge's opening. We see that a lot of strange things happen in the town during the time where the doors to the lodges are opening because of the planetary alignments. I think it's possible that Dale and Annie's feelings, or at least Dale's feelings if we consider Annie to be evil, could be magnified by the effect of the lodges. In terms of productivity, Annie has a negative effect on Dale. He can't think of anything but Annie, and he distracts himself by thinking of Annie when he's supposed to be working on the case of Wyndham's case, and supposed to be focusing on trying to figure out more about the lodges and what they mean. We see Annie and Dale have a conversation at the diner one time, and towards the end of that scene there is an implication that everything is not quite right. I always thought that it was sort of a foreshadowing and nothing more than that, but what if it was actually more to do with Annie's being and who she is and what she is doing? She engages Dale in a lot of talk about religion, which is not surprising given that she comes from the convent. However, the fact that Dale is so spiritual, I just think it's a very convenient shared interest. I do think that if you were trying to hook Dale on a fishhook and drag him into that lodge for whatever reason, then this is exactly how you would do it. You would use a lure like Annie, and she would have to be a thoughtful, spiritual, naive, innocent beauty. There are the things that are said in conversation between Annie and Dale that could also be read to more than one way. For instance, the quote of hear the other side, see the other side. Both say it to one another at different points, and the other side could obviously refer to the other dimension, Bob's lair, if you like, the Black Lodge and everything that lies beyond, rather than just what's out there in life waiting to be discovered, as they imply that it means. Annie and Dale at the dance is another scene that I think is important in this theory. The giant appears midway during the dance and waves his hands at Cooper. No, no, no. This is just after Dale calls Annie the Queen. The giant's message seems to be a warning. and it seems to be a warning given so that Dale can protect Annie. But again, I think this could be looked at from another angle. What if the giant was actually warning Cooper off Annie and saying, you shouldn't make her the queen, because as soon as you do that, Wyndham will take her to the lodge. Annie asks Dale to write her speech for the Miss Twin Peaks contest, and I think that's quite interesting because of the fact that she relies on Dale's spiritual instincts to get her through that contest. That whole speech concerns the past of Twin Peaks and the past of the land and what it means. I think the topic of Annie's speech closely connects to the idea of the lodges and their existence. And I just think that, you know, we could look at that as her manipulating Dale. When Annie goes to see Dale at the hotel, actually to ask him to write that speech, she says some interesting things, and one of the things she says is they start talking about the forests because that's the subject of the speech, and she says that my forest is damaged or something along that line. And that reminded me a little of the way Leland speaks about himself when he is finally vacated, and he talks about his mind being hollowed out, if you like, by Bob's influence. And I thought the same about Annie when she said about her inner forest being damaged, because that could be a similar thing. She could have an inhabiting lodge spirit inside her, and that could be the damage that she refers to, and not the damage that she experienced from her romantic relationship when she was a teen. There are a few other things. I think that when Annie has been crowned Miss Twin Peaks, if you look at that scene, she actually stands on the stage and seems to wait while everybody else screams and runs away. So she looks like she's waiting for something, possibly waiting for Wyndham to come and take her away. And then when Wyndham takes her to the entrance to the Black Lodge, Annie appears to be suffering from fear, which is exactly what we are led to believe, the story about love and fear opening the doors. And Wyndham aims to use Annie's fear to open the door. So she is acting scared, there is no doubt about that, but could it be an act? We hear Wyndham say at one point, "I'm liking the fear that I'm feeling." I think that Wyndham's line could be interpreted in more than one way. Wyndham doesn't appear to have any fear himself, but quite close to the end of the series, we see a tape recording of Wyndham in which he appears to be fearful when he's discussing the lodges and the Dugpas and what they do. He is definitely a man on edge in that videotape. And that Wyndham, although superficially he seems to be a very powerful, he seems to have turned into a psychopath with no feelings and with nothing at stake. But that Wyndham still has to be inside him somewhere. So is there a possibility that Wyndham could be referring to his own fear and that he just doesn't know it? He just doesn't recognize his own fear? Annie quotes scripture as she's being pulled into the lodge, and her behaviour at this time appears to drive Wyndham to pull her into the lodge. If we look at it from Wyndham's perspective, Wyndham wants Annie to be in the lodge so that Dale will enter. But what if it was the other way around? Annie is actually luring Dale rather than Wyndham luring Dale. Inside the lodge there are some very strange scenes, and one in particular stands out for me with Annie when she appears. Wyndham appears, I think, he appears first of all in like a flash of Laura's doppelganger when she's screaming. Wyndham's face appears in that, and I don't know to what extent Wyndham is able to control things inside the lodge, but at one point Annie seems to manifest out of thin air and Wyndham is facing Dale, and Annie stands at the back of them, and she looks at Dale and she looks at Wyndham. She says nothing, and I just think that it's a strange scene because of the fact that, you know, it reminds me of the chess game that Wyndham thinks he's playing. If this is the chess game and this is the end move, then which piece is which? Is Annie really the queen? If Annie really is a queen in that chess game, then is she actually on the other side of the board to Dale? Is she the black and Dale the white? Is Wyndham actually on the same side as Dale? Or is he just a pawn on Bob's side of the board? I think it's a strange way, the way that they are set up in that triangle shape, with Annie overlooking them as if she has ultimate power. When we see Annie exit the lodge, she is bloodied on her face, and yet I don't think we see her being injured inside the lodge. So why is she injured when she comes out of the lodge? Because I don't think Dale is. So it's not like you gain injury from entering or exiting the lodge. That is not something that affects the human form. Is it possible that her injuries are are something to do with the inhabiting spirit exiting her body inside the lodge? Although Annie, on the surface of things, seems like an innocent piece in this game, when Dale gets into the lodge, it is clear that there is some kind of conspiracy between the lodge spirits, that they always seem to know that Dale was going to be there. When Leland's doppelganger and Cooper's doppelganger stop in the corridor and they look straight at the camera, they have this maniacal laughter. They seem to imply that they knew that this was going to happen, and that Dale is like the rat in their trap. And if they knew that this was going to happen, then how did they know that this was going to happen? Could they have had a secret agent, and that secret agent be Annie, or whoever was inhabiting Annie? Things that don't add up in my theory are the fact that we see Annie outside of scenes with Dale, and she continues this act of innocence, such as when she goes to the bar and she talks about not knowing what to drink at the bar. This appears to be a genuine innocence, although you could look at it as the same way as my theory about like the lodge spirits and their sensory experiences. So I've kind of wondered whether the lodge spirits, when they inhabit a human body, that sensory experiences are new to them. So that when Annie asks the bar what she should drink, she is asking from her inhabiting spirit point of view, because that spirit hasn't experienced that before. Also, the fact that we are told that fear and love enter the lodges, and this, basically, it's quite a big deal in the storyline that, you know, they have to use Annie's fear to open the door of the lodge. So for that not to be true, and for that to be a trick, it seems unlikely. There is another aspect which negates my theory, I think, and that is the fact that Annie appears to Laura in Fire Walk with Me and gives Laura the message that she is inside the lodge with the good Dale. This appears to be a warning message to Laura. On the surface, that there seems to be no other explanation as to why Annie would say that. I tried to think about why Annie would say that. There is a possibility that when Annie appeared to Laura, and she's in that bloodied state as far as I can remember, that the spirit that was inside her, inhabiting her, has exited her at that point inside the lodge, and so that is the real Annie trying to warn Laura. I mean, we see in that scene where Annie is talking to Dale in the diner and they smash the dishes when they kiss, that the notion of the oil that is connected to the Black Lodge appears in, it's like the coffee or the gravy that they spill is obviously meant to look like the oil. So what I'm saying is, when Annie and Wyndham were at the Black Lodge entrance, it could have been Wyndham's fear that opened the lodge, or it could have been Annie might have had the right to return to that lodge. I think that's it. Please tell me if this, I mean, please tell me if you think I'm just talking bullshit. Because it's just something I thought of. I mean, if this has been a theory that's been around for a long time, then I apologise for going over it again. That's it for now. Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you like Twin Peaks and want to keep up to date with rewatches, news about the new show, and maybe more theories. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheLogSadie, and I have a Facebook page at the same name. Okay, that's it for now. Bye!